Keir Starmer's incredibly uncharismatic. He can't talk. He just sort of has that sort of adenoidal, whinging, slightly disapproving, hectoring tone, and he just goes on pretending like reality's not happening and has no lightness of touch. Really, watching Andy Burnham, and I don't at all count myself much of an optimist about Andy Burnham, you do think, God, the minimum you can get right when you're picking a leader is someone who can give a speech and act like a human being.
Let's start, team, with Keir Starmer. He's been setting out the Defence Investment Plan this morning. It was the familiar soaring oratory we've come to expect from Keir Starmer. It's a bit weird, isn't it, Charlotte? Like a Prime Minister who no longer in power, really, in any meaningful sense, setting out something as fundamental as how this country is going to be protected, talking about all the things that we will do, and the we isn't he.
Yes, although I suppose it'd be weird to just not set out how the country is going to be protected, given how long this plan has been in the making and how important it is. The idea of just sort of taking a 3-week break while we wait for Andy Burnham to get his ducks in a row at a time where we're always told our armed forces aren't good enough and there are huge global threats, probably not a great idea either. So yeah, it's sort of a bit of a catch-22 really, isn't it? I did hear him on your show on the radio earlier and I sort of went, oh, what's that voice? That's really weird. It's like sort of hearing the voice of someone you knew 10 years ago and go, oh yeah, he's still here, isn't he?
Well, I wonder. It's just this whole government at the moment, James. It's a bit like it's like Wile E. Coyote running off a cliff. You know, and his legs keep pumping. So, like later today, the government's immigration bill's being introduced to Parliament, which is part of Shabana Mahmood's plan to get a grip on legal and illegal migration. Again, though, will she be there in the same job in 3 weeks' time? Nobody knows. Will Andy Burnham reverse course? Nobody knows.
Yeah, exactly. It is weird. I think it's all to do with the strangeness of the speed of this government transition. It's not really that long ago. Was it under 2 weeks ago that Keir Starmer was still insisting he wasn't going anywhere and everything was going to carry on as normal, and then suddenly he's disappearing, and not only disappearing, but disappearing incredibly quickly. And there's that very Keir Starmer thing of just continuing to pretend nothing's happening, which he was doing all the way through the time when we all knew he was going to resign and we all thought that Andy Burnham was coming for him, and he was just sort of leadenly insisting in his adenoidal way that everything was going to continue as usual. And maybe he'll just be, pretend it's all not happening up until the very moment that he's finally booted out of Downing Street, and then, as you say, Andy Burnham may very well, reverse or at least dial down Shabana Mahmood's immigration strategy.
It's constantly maddening how just incredibly Keir Starmer manages to be. I mean, hearing him speak this morning, and I must admit we didn't get to hear quite all of it, so maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think at any point he acknowledged that he wasn't going to be Prime Minister for much longer, that he was setting out plans that were going to be enacted by somebody else, that his Defence Secretary had resigned over precisely. He just decides it's not the issue and he just doesn't address it. It's odd, isn't it odd?
Well, I suppose something like the Defence Review is relatively unideological. It's probably quite likely that Andy Burnham will continue with what has been set out there, although obviously we don't know that absolutely. So it's not that mad. It's funny, isn't it? There's all this reporting about Andy Burnham wanting a fair bit of time to get to grips and then to come in and say September, and Keir Starmer basically saying, no, you're the one that cooed me, you can't now say, can you please hang around, I'm not quite ready to take over. And I felt a bit childish because I thought, yeah, get him. Like, yeah, obviously, have we, and that's probably not what is best for the country. Probably it is a good idea for Andy Burnham, who has been focusing on winning this by-election, to have a fair bit of time to work out what he's going to do with government. But also at the same time, you think if you were Keir Starmer, you just go on then, mate, have a go. Yeah. You've thrown me out.
Do you know, many years ago, I went up to, I think it was I was in Newcastle, actually, James, and I was interviewing a bunch of people who worked in a call centre who had just found out that their jobs were being outsourced to somewhere in India, but in the month of notice that they'd been given, they had to train up the Indian workforce who'd been sort of shipped over to learn precisely what to do in the call centre. This was the last thing they were going to do before their jobs were handed over to them. That's kind of what you want Keir Starmer to do, isn't it?
Yeah, that's a very good metaphor.
Yeah, indeed. Look, speaking of Andy Burnham, he was, of course, speaking yesterday. What did you... I mean, just... never mind the substance, James.
Forget the substance.
We'll come to substance later if we must. Style, tone, performance. What did you think?
I've got to say, I mean, he's got an incredibly easy act to follow, and watching that speech, it was very hard not to think what an unbelievably eccentric choice it was, picking Keir Starmer to be the leader of the Labour Party. Obviously, we care about substance. It's very important. Politics is also essentially a branch of show business, and never more so than in the current moment. And we've all said, yeah, Keir Starmer's incredibly uncharismatic. He can't talk. He just sort of has that sort of adenoidal, whinging, slightly disapproving, hectoring tone, and he just goes on pretending like reality's not happening and has no lightness of touch. Really, watching Andy Burnham, and I don't at all count myself much of an optimist to Andy Burnham, you do think, God, the minimum you can get right when you're picking a leader is someone who can give a speech and act like a human being. And it did sort of make me think, wow, it really was. We weren't being mad when we were saying Keir Starmer's a terrible communicator. This is a weird thing to do. It really did strike me as outright eccentric of the Labour Party to pick someone who is quite so, head down, don't be charismatic, just keep bulldozing forward and, repeating the talking points. And that matters. I think it's also actually, I'm by no means a Burnham optimist, but he is probably the most charismatic person in the Labour Party. I can't really think of anyone who could come close to giving a speech like that. As I say, substance is a different issue, but I do think, the razzle-dazzle does matter, unfortunately, at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, I had, flashes of wondering how he'd sound if he was on the back foot, because it's not quite easy, it's relatively easy to give a sort of upbeat speech when everyone's cheering you on and telling you you're wonderful. But the manner of his delivery, Charlotte, and, I know you've been a sort of keen watcher of such things, there aren't a lot of... he makes it look very easy, very natural. There aren't a lot of politicians who can talk like that. Even the ones who are great speakers, somebody like Boris Johnson, you can see the artifice behind the shambles, whereas he just sounded like he was up there having a chat.
Yeah, he did. I don't know. I've really taken against Andy Burnham. This is really bad, isn't it? And I've been, as you were speaking, James, I was trying to work out why. And I think it's because he sort of wandered in and kind of assuming that it will all be easy and that if you just get good old Andy Burnham in, then he will be able to fix the country, which is sort of what Keir Starmer did as well. As long as the horrid Tories aren't here anymore, we'll just fix all the country's problems. And I find it quite arrogant and quite annoying. So I was a bit wound up by the speech yesterday, possibly because this man can't breathe without me being irritated by it, and it's not his fault. But I found the joking around at the start, and I'm not wearing my suit, and Tom Peck had a good line in his sketch in the Times, and
yes.
People are calling this my Manchester T-shirt in Westminster, and Tom Peck says, "Are they?
Are they really?
I
yeah.
don't think they are.
Are they calling you Manchester
and,
clothes?
He's sort of got this chip on his shoulder about something I don't really think he should have a chip on his shoulder about. No one thinks that Manchester, they're all sort of covered in woad and wrestling each other. It's a really impressive city.
I mean, that's interesting, because I think we'll come on to this a bit later when we talk about the North-South divide, but I don't really think that's the joke he was making. I think he was making we're all normal people who just hang out in T-shirts, whereas down in London they're literally all Jacob Rees-Mogg, is what he was saying, wasn't he?
Which again is this sort of weird kind of parody of modern Britain, and I find it a bit silly, but it was more the joking in general that I didn't like. I thought, yes, that's all very well and good if you are Boris Johnson, Mayor of London, Andy Burnham, Mayor of Manchester. If you are going to be Prime Minister, it's not a funny job, and you just cannot be joking all the time. But as I say, I don't know why this man has rubbed me up the wrong way. Anything he does now, I think is going to irritate me. I'm going to try and distance myself a bit from that and give him a good chance, because obviously it's in all of our interests for him to succeed.
I'm going to enjoy having a ringside seat as that wonderful ambition completely disintegrates over the coming weeks and months. Just before we move on from this, there is a sort of building narrative about Andy Burnham that he's avoiding scrutiny because he didn't take any questions after the speech yesterday. He also had a bit of a pop at journalists for speculating about his cabinet, as if that wasn't literally the job we were meant to be doing. The dodging scrutiny thing, James, what do you think about this? Because, I mean, like, Boris Johnson tried to do it unsuccessfully. Donald Trump's tried to do it, probably quite successfully. People seem to be nicer about it because Andy Burnham's wearing a T-shirt, but it's basically the same.
Yes, I mean, there was I saw Alistair Campbell pointing out on Twitter that from a communications point of view, making your speech and then not allowing journalists to pep you with questions afterwards, making it about themselves, might be a sound strategy. I think it is interesting the point you make about whether he's going to be good on the back foot, and I think perhaps this shows an awareness that he knows that he's not always on top form when he's being questioned and criticised. I guess one answer is this is politics, and if you think you're not going to be good at something, then avoid doing that and keep going with the upbeat stuff. I mean, I suppose at least in these early kind of days of before he's even Prime Minister, you just want to keep up it's all going to be great. I'm going to change everything. I'm not just a charismatic Keir Starmer with a T-shirt.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess you think you've got a lot to lose, so why risk losing it? We've been talking about Andy Burnham and his speech yesterday, and I want to talk a bit about his focus on the North and whether, in his attempt to heal Britain, he's going to end up emphasising the cultural divide between the North and the South. James Marriott, you're a Northerner, even though you sold your soul and came South in exchange for fame and baubles. But do you ever think it's about time someone stuck it to these Southerners I'm forced to live amongst?
I haven't really thought it, but I do think that Andy Burnham is reviving some of my northern pride. There's evidently a lot of mileage to be had from being a professional Northerner, something I signally failed to do through my entire career, having tried very hard in my teens to adopt a Southern accent, and then I always think I should just gratuitously mention that I'm from Newcastle more to make me feel more of a exotic species in the London-centric media world. I think it's sort of annoying if you're a Londoner, and it's annoying if you're down south. I think there probably is political mileage in it. I think people in London often underestimate how resented and disliked London is by other parts of the country. Often when I'm outside London, you kind of notice in cafes and stuff, there'll be... I can't remember where I was somewhere recently, and there's just a cafe that was randomly selling postcards that had some sort of little twee happy message on about how awful London was. And I do think it's possible for Londoners to forget that they're often viewed this way, to forget that they're viewed as snooty and rich and don't care about the rest of the country. And it is kind of understandable, because it isn't, there's such a dramatic divide between London and the rest of the country. And if you're in London, you can often forget to notice it, not least because people in London, I think, often very rarely visit the rest of the country. So yeah, I'm actually back up in Newcastle this weekend, so I'm really leaning into it. I'm hoping to come back with my Geordie accent and a Newcastle shirt, and I'm just going to drop it in conversation constantly, because if it's working for Andy Burnham, perhaps it can work for me. I
mean, there's a massive divide between London and the rest of the country, but less so between London and Manchester, ironically enough. And I wonder, do people in Newcastle actually think of Manchester as being a fellow northern city, or do they think of Manchester as being, let's be honest, basically the Midlands?
To me, Manchester's the Midlands, and in fact, I think this could be the next frontier of my career, which is I could start criticising Andy Burnham for being a Southerner.
That would be wonderful. Charlotte, you are a Southerner, at least some of the times. What do you think about Andy Burnham treating the South as the baddies?
Well, the South
the Lannisters, even.
The South is making all of the money in the country, and then it is already flowing to every other part of Britain, which is a good thing. But if you eliminate that, then you're in real trouble if you are living anywhere that doesn't have this kind of massive productivity. And Burnham spent all of his speech talking about how we need good growth, and basically the implication being that growth has been too centred in London and the South East, and people haven't felt it, which is true to a certain extent. Certainly it was true in kind of post-Big Bang in the 90s and the early noughties. We have had the most stagnant growth for the longest time in this country. The idea that we've got this sort of overheated economy where it's all going too well in London and everyone else is suffering as a result of it is insane. Any growth would be really good for the country right now. I don't think we need to be self-righteous about where it comes from. And the fact of the matter is, London is incredibly economically strong compared to the rest of the country. There are all these terrible stats about how if you remove London, we're basically a kind of, third world country in terms of GDP per capita. And so I think cutting down the top bits of the country is, well, it's the opposite of what Boris Johnson called levelling up, isn't it? It will mean everyone suffers. And I think Burnham, to give him his credit, probably does understand that. I don't think the rhetoric is quite going to match what actually ends up happening.
There's something in his rhetoric, Charlotte, I'm interested to know what you think about this, that reminds me of how, and I said this a little bit earlier, but reminds me of how during the Scottish referendum, Scottish nationalists would talk about London as if, nobody in London ever wears a T-shirt. You know what I mean? Nobody in London ever listens to pop music.
Well, also, everybody in London used to be everywhere else. Look at me and James. We are economic migrants into London because that is where the jobs are. I'm sure if there were outposts of big media organisations in other parts of the UK, and certainly Manchester has benefited from having the BBC in Salford, then James and I might have stayed home. But at the moment, a lot of the people in London are sort of there because that's where people go if they want a higher salary or they want to work in certain industries, which is a problem that probably needs fixing, but it doesn't make them the enemy.
What do you think as well, Charlotte, of number 10 North?
Sure, actually, I think that's probably quite a good idea. I think there'll be problems with Andy Burnham being in Manchester half the week. We all know that prime ministers that don't spend a lot of time in Parliament listening to their MPs whinging do end up in a bit of trouble. But that problem comes for prime ministers that are across the road in 10 Downing Street, so I don't think it'll be the end of the world. Rishi Sunak moving a Treasury campus to Darlington, I think, was an unremarked success of his government. So a friend in the Treasury describes it as, when you first went up, you could just tell who worked for the Treasury because they would be sort of richer and shinier looking, and then they all moved from London and it was a bit silly. But a few years in, what you are now seeing is genuinely local people being brought in, genuinely good jobs arriving in the area for local people, and it does seem to have genuinely improved the town centre and all that jazz. So yeah, this is probably a decent idea, I think.
We've had a message, James. This is from George. He says, James isn't from Newcastle, he's from Whitley, and that's posh. I'm from Byker, but I'm posh now because we live in Highbury. There we go.
Another economic migrant.
He says, James is right, Manchester is in the Midlands. Thank you very much indeed, George.